Everybody ready? Can y'all hear me? I can hear me, and that is really weird. Yeah. Okay. No, we're good. And as long as y'all can hear me, I think I can make it through. Don't say that. Don't say that. Okay. So the last time I was here, we were going over the miracles of Jesus, right, and John, and we went over. Um, I made a list because I couldn't remember. Um, I did, and that's the wrong list. Anyway, we went over four of them, and we've got three of them left to do. And I was intending on getting to every one of them tonight, but just like last time, as I was going over it, I felt like I couldn't pick and pull the pieces out that I felt like I needed to fit it all within this hour. So we're going to do two, and then next week when I come back, we're going to add one. I hadn't exactly figured out which one yet, but uh, I'm I'm leaning on one that I think everybody's going to really enjoy. But um, again, we need to, or will, tonight we're going to go over where Jesus healed the man at the pool, and the pool of Bethesda. And then we're going to go over where he healed the man born blind. Now, the difference about this week versus the last time I was here, last time there was a lot of uh, visual aspects to what was going on at that point in time, and the the miracles themselves were very visual miracles. These that we're going over tonight, the miracles are front and center, and they are beyond a shadow of a doubt miracles, but they are not as visible or as visual as the miracles such as your feeding of the 5,000, the calming of the winds and the waves, those kinds of things. So, um, and having said that, the the story, the miracle is the center of the story, but the point is everything surrounding the miracles. So we're going to dig into that a little bit. But first, we're going to pray because I forgot to do that last time. Heavenly Father, I thank you so much for this evening. I thank you for this day, beautiful day. We got a little bit of rain that we needed. I thank you so much for all the folks that came out here tonight. I pray that you have been working on them, that you've opened their hearts and minds to receive the message that you've laid before us. Father, I pray that I deliver this teaching, these stories in a way that really brings to light the things that you need your children here to hear. Father, if you would please place a hedge of protection around us, rid our minds of all the distractions that we have, because you know as well as we do, there's so many distractions in this world. So Father, be with us. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. All right, so if y'all would, if you'll meet me in John chapter 5, we're going to go through verses 1 through 16. And as I usually do, I'll read those 16 verses. I'll read the story, then we'll go back through and kind of break them down. So, 5 verse 1. After this, a Jewish festival took place, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. By the, by the sheep gate in Jerusalem, there is a pool called Bethesda in Arabic, which has 5 colonnades. Within these lay a large number of disabled, blind, lame, and paralyzed. One man was there who had been disabled for 38 years. When Jesus saw him laying there and realized that he had already been there a long time, he said to him, "Do you want to get well?" "Sir," the disabled man answered, "I have no one to put me in the pool when the water is stirred up. But while I'm coming, someone goes down ahead of me." "Get up," Jesus told him. "Pick up your mat and walk." Instantly the man got well, picked up his mat, and started to walk. Now that day was the Sabbath day. And so the Jews said to him, or said to the man who had been, I'm sorry, he said to the man who had been healed, this is the Sabbath day. The law prohibits you from picking up your mat. He replied, the man who made me well told me, pick up your mat and walk. Who is this man who told you, pick up your mat and walk? They asked. But the man who was healed did not know who it was because Jesus had slipped away into the crowd that was there. After this, Jesus found him in the temple and said to him, see, you are well. Do not sin anymore so that nothing worse doesn't happen to you. The man went and reported to the Jews that it was Jesus who made him well. Therefore, the Jews began persecuting Jesus because he was doing these things on the Sabbath. So, I don't know who all here has a King James version, but if y'all will look with me real quick, verse 3, you see the little number of verse 3, and then the next is verse 5. There's a missing verse, verse 4, and verse 4 is kind of the backstory on why everybody's gathered around this pool in the first place. And so it says, the belief was that an angel would come down from heaven, stir the pool, and at that moment that the water was stirred, the first one who got in after the water was stirred up, whatever ailed them would be removed. And so everybody hung out by this pool. Has anybody here watched The Chosen? This story was depicted in The Chosen, and it was depicted very, very well, or fairly well, because we don't know exactly what happened. There's a lot of blanks that have to be filled in. But the show actually depicted this man falling out of a tree as a kid. And so then he was paralyzed, and at some point in that near future, he was taken and set by that pool and was left there. And then for however many years after that, he was just trampled over. And just people were diving into the waters as soon as they got started. And it was just a real sad story, a real sad scene of this man just being the world just beating him down at every turn, every time he thought he had hope. And so anyway, if you haven't seen it, it's in the second season. I know it was the last one that me and Jamie watched, but still very good story. Obviously, this was a superstition. The reason that this verse 4 was taken out, it was in for a while, and then as manuscripts began to be discovered, it was said that one of the scribes had added that piece in there for further explanation on why things were the way they while people were there. But anyway, it's not necessarily out of this world to think that in those ancient times that they would believe such a thing. They didn't have the technology that they had. Technology. They were not stupid people just because it was ancient times. They mapped the world with sticks, strings, and dirts and rocks. I mean, they were not stupid people. But they did believe funny things. And in getting ready for this, I found a couple of things out of the Papyrus Ebers. It's an Egyptian medical book from this time. And so, to stop hair from turning gray, one of the things that they say is you anoint it with the blood of a black calf boiled in oil or with the fat of a rattlesnake. All right? For balding, you apply a mix of 6 fats: horse, hippo, crocodile, cat, snake, and ibex. And to strengthen that hair, you anoint it with the tooth of a donkey crushed in honey. All right? Now that's yeah, I tell you what. But anyway, back to the story. So talking about that show, The Chosen, that was a good way to depict it. But at the same time, you have to think over 38 years, a man cannot survive laying next to a pool. He has to get out. He has to go. He has to beg for anything, whether that be money, food, uh, the bare necessities, whatever essentials. So I think it's safe to say that he didn't go far, obviously. We don't know exactly what his illness was. We just know that that he can't walk. He was a disabled man who could not walk. So um, let me make sure I'm not getting ahead of myself here. So yeah, he could not walk, and but he did, I'm sure, manage to get around a little bit. The point that I'm trying to make here is that the people around him knew who he was. The religious the, when John says the Jews, he means the religious elites, right? So the Pharisees, the Sadducees, all of those folks, and so he um, he had to have been known. And so, in that case, let's get back to the scriptures here. Verse 6. When Jesus saw him laying there and realized that he had been there a long time, he said to him, "Do you want to get well?" At first, I thought it was redundant. Um, of course, he wants to be healed, but honestly, maybe not. We've all had issues in life, and over time, you kind of learn to live with them, and you kind of learn to adapt to your situation. This man, he had been this way for 38 years. And 38 years, I'm not exactly sure what the lifespan was of somebody back then, but 38 years is getting pretty close to the end of it. And so he had been sustained, obviously, by God for a purpose, being what we're fisting to get into. But when a man is not lame anymore and he has spent his life that way, or the better part of his life, surely, that way, and he's not anymore, well, then all of a sudden you have no reason to beg. All of a sudden you have to get up and you have to get a job, and you are 38 plus, 40 plus years old, and you have no skills because you've been laying there for the most part of your life. And so it's not as simple of a question as, yes, I'd love to. So um, after 38 years, he may have been more comfortable with the devil that he had come to know. So it is a really good question, a question that the man that took the man by surprise, and it set his attention on exactly the task at hand. It put him in the place that Jesus needed him to be to make all this progress. In verse 7, he says, "Sir, I have no one to put me in the pool when the water gets stirred up. When the water is stirred up, but while I'm coming, someone else goes in ahead of me." The man reveals the pattern that has happened to him so many times over so many years. It 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 showed. Well, I'm sorry. You would think that he would have lost hope over that many years, over that many times, because you got to imagine. I don't know how this water was being stirred. It was said that it had a red tint to it, like a mineral deposit type tint to it. So yes, I'm sure it did have healing qualities if for your minor ailments. But I seriously doubt that he ever laid there and watched a lame person get in and then hop out and run away. But regardless, he still had hope, and that's what Jesus was trying to get at. When he asked him, "Do you want to get well?" He gave him that excuse, but Jesus saw the hope left in his heart. That's why he was still there. That's why he hadn't given up. So Jesus gives him commands. He says, "Get up, pick up your mat, and walk." The first of these is the most important. A man laying there for 40 years, you would think would have some reservations on how his legs work. Me and you, we don't think too much about it. When it's time to get up out of our chair, we get up out of our chair, and we don't think about that we're actually falling and then taking that next step, or catching ourselves with our next foot as we take our another step, which we're actually falling forward to pick up that next step. So anyway, I was in a car wreck. Um, I don't know, 10, 12 years ago. I can't remember. But anyway, I was bounced around in a single cab truck enough that when I woke up in the hospital, my legs didn't work. And when I say my legs didn't work, I went to resituate myself, and everything from about here down didn't work. And so I was in a panic, and I told mom and dad, I cannot move my toes. And so they called for the doctor. The doctor came in, and he took, I thought I had a pen, but he took his pen out of his pocket, and he picked up the sheet, and he ran that pen up the bottom of my foot. And when it tickled my foot, I had this pain. I still remember it. It was the deepest pain run from the bottom of my foot up to my chest. Everything was so banged up and so bruised up internally that I guess everything had kind of shut down. He said, but don't worry, you're going to be fine. Nothing has been broken. You need to heal up. I spent 5 days, 3 days in the hospital and 2 days at home in a wheelchair before I could stand up on my own. And then mom came home with groceries one day. And I reached in the back of her car to pick up just a little bag of something or other, and I almost fell down because I was able to walk in a straight line. I was able to turn corners and that kind of thing, but I hadn't got my balance back yet. Whenever I went to pick that up, it was all I could do not to fall down. What I'm trying to get at here is that when I hurt myself, it took me days and days and days to recover. And then after that, it took me another couple of days to be able to operate like I was prior to. When this happened, when Jesus told him to pick up his mat, or when Jesus told him to get up, the healing did not happen until he made the move, until he obeyed. It did not happen. So what happened, we don't know. But what we do know is that it was 100% full restoration in a moment, in the slightest glimpse of time. So the initial act of obedience is what would restore him. Had he sat there and told him, what difference does it make? He would have never moved. He would have never got up. It was his act of obedience that initiated that restoration. And then the next shows us, as I was saying, when he said, pick up your mat and walk. If I would have those, and I don't remember doing this, but had I bent over to pick anything up when I was first getting my legs back under me, I probably would have fell on my face, because I just didn't have the strength in my toes and in my ankles and everything like I should have had. But that shows us that it is a complete and perfect cure. No need for rehabilitation, no need for training, none of that. And to do all three, or to do both, and then the third, pick up your mat and walk, was to testify that Jesus is the Son of God and the Lord of the Sabbath. And that is the point. That is the point of this entire healing. Jesus wanted the Pharisees to know. Jesus walked into a place probably about as big as this room. I don't know for sure, but to say that this pool had 5 colonnades, those colonnades were like porches, and they weren't exactly small. I imagine them about half the size of one of these rows of chairs. And if you watch the show, that's about the size that's depicted roundabout. So it's a fairly large room. There's 5 of these and a pool in the middle. And so Jesus is something that I forgot to mention. Jesus is in town for a feast at this point in time. Jerusalem had a average population of about 25,000, and when one of these major feasts happened, the population rose to about 1 million, give or take. So a lot of people came in, and so this place that would usually be fairly busy was packed with people. Jesus walked in to a room this size full of people that needed his help, and he saw that one person. And that one person was going to, and I think it has a lot to do with verse 5, verse 6, when Jesus saw him laying there, realized he had been there for a long time. He realized that he wasn't a guy from out of town. He realized that he was a guy from right there that had been there long enough that everybody knew who he was, and that him up walking, breaking the Sabbath, which is what Jesus initiated here, their rules, not God's rules. But that's what Jesus needed out of this, and that's what that man needed from Jesus at this point in time. So the problem here is that the traditions of the Jewish elders had imposed laws far beyond what God intended for the Sabbath, and the laws of Moses as well. This was a corrupt, false religion that was dragging its followers to hell. With the man healed and obeying Christ, he drew attention to himself by carrying the mat from one place to another on the Sabbath because it was against their rules, their laws. In this instance, like many others, no one denied the miracle. They focused on the tradition. The Jews didn't care one bit about the miracle that just happened. They cared about their rules. He knew and obeyed the law. Jesus himself did not care about their rules. He knew and obeyed the law of Moses and did it in a way to stir up a little controversy. I'm really bad about that, and I'm glad I see this in Jesus, because I'll do that to my kids all the time. And so just to get a rise out of them, just to get a little pushback from them. So anyway, you would think that a man who had been laying there for 38 years, that had been healed in this moment, would walk out of there and he would seek out Jesus, and he would see exactly who did this for him. Let me get so the Jewish elites were there, or were close enough. In the show, it depicts them as just standing to the side, and so we don't know that for sure, but we do know that they were close enough to that when he picked up his mat and took off, that they stopped him. So the man who was healed, verse 13 says, but the man who was healed did not know who it was, because Jesus slipped away into the crowds. After this, Jesus found him in the temple and said, "See, you are well." And this is a key point right here. Do not sin anymore, so that something worse doesn't happen to you. After laying on your back or on your side for 38 years, not being able to use your legs, what could be worse than that? Probably hell itself. It was probably Jesus saying to him, "This is it, bud. This is your final go at it. If you start screwing up again, you ain't coming back." And so, having said this, and having the story in your mind, and having all that wrapped up, you imagine how you would react to all this. And listen, in verse 15 and 16. The man went and reported to the Jews that it was Jesus who had made him well. Why do you think he did that? Because their false religion, their way of doing things was nothing new. They had been, the Pharisees and the Sadducees, they had made these rules up over time. But this man, along with generations before him, were taught all these rules, all these regulations that basically built a fence around Moses' law. And it completely it completely blocked sight of it. They had lost sight of what the law really was and what it was about. He was caught. Um, he was caught breaking the rules of the Sabbath by one of these Pharisees or one of these higher ups. And so as soon as he was questioned about it, he said, "Man, I don't know. I have no clue who this guy was." And another part remind me, well, I'm going to get to it. It's in our next story. It's proof of that fact. As soon as he did know, he went and he reported to the Jews that it was Jesus who had made him well. And that at that point, see, they had already been mad at Jesus and they had already been conjuring up ways that they could trap him. But now they took it to the next level. They began persecuting Jesus because he was doing these things on the Sabbath. He was healing people. That's why they were mad at him. It wasn't that he was actually breaking any rules. It was because they made him look bad. So after all that, hang on. So this man goes and he pays homage to the Jewish elites, the Jewish leaders, to make up for his part in breaking the Sabbath. And the reason for that is in 9:22 that we're fishing to get to. But the problem here, like I said before, it was their traditions. It wasn't that they were trying to obey God, because that's what we're doing here. We're trying to learn more. We're trying to become better at being disciples, at being students of Christ. And now they didn't have Christ. Well, they did, but he wasn't as well known as he is today. But still, they had this religious system that was blocking people from going to heaven, where it was supposed to be the tool that got them into heaven. And so let's go over to John chapter 9 and let's get into this next one, and this will make just a little bit more sense. John chapter 9 verse 1. I'm not going to read all of this because this really encompasses the entire chapter of chapter 9. So what we're going to do is I'm going to read you the first 7 and we're going to go over the miracle, and then we're going to talk through the rest of the chapter, jumping through a couple of verses here. So as he was passing by, he saw a blind man from birth. And his disciples asked him, "Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?" Jesus said, "Neither this man or his parents sinned. This came about so that God's works might be displayed in him. We must do the works of him who sent me while it is day. Night is coming when no one can work. As long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world." After he said these things, he spit on the ground, made some mud from the saliva, and spread it on the man's eyes. Go, he told him. Wash in the pool of Siloam, which means sent. So he left, washed, and came back seeing. So that is the miracle. And you can't deny it's a miracle. A man born blind. We don't know how old this man is, but I'm guessing he's somewhere around his 20s, early to mid 20s, and I'll tell you why here in just a little bit. But let's start back at verse 1. They were passing by, and this again was a Sabbath day, but regardless, his disciples, they see this man, and he is a beggar, he is blind, he can't do anything but beg, and they ask him, "Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?" Because that was their belief. If there was a problem, it was because you or your parents sinned. And believe it or not, they believed that you could sin in the womb. That's how ridiculous it was. So regardless, they had a question, and it was a good question. They weren't talking nonsense, and they weren't just trying to pass the time. It was an honest question. And unlike the story, Jesus says, neither this man nor his parents sinned. This came about so that God's God's works may be displayed in him. So, verse 4, let me read 4 and 5. Let me read 5 and then 4. Because this, like a lot of it, a lot of the Bible, you can take these points, flip the verses, and it sounds just as good. So let me read it like this. As long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world. We must do the works of him who sent me while it is day. Night is coming when no one can work. So that is exactly why Jesus performed this miracle. And the funny part about this, if you really think about it, he's healing a blind man, right? Would you heal a blind man at nighttime? You're just going to open his eyes so he can see the darkness? That's not, And yeah, that's a pun. But still, it is the truth. But regardless, that is not the point. This is a reference to Christ being taken away at the death. I'm sorry. This is a reference to Christ being taken away from them at his death and being taken over by darkness until Pentecost when they were given the Holy Spirit. It's important that I mention the personal application of this. So Christ used we. He said we. We must do the works of him. So Christ had only his day to get his job done in the context of this story. Just like Christ, our duty is attached to a time frame. The difference is Christ knew how much time he had. We don't. We don't have a watch for that time. From the youngest of us to the oldest of us, no one can see how high the sun is or when it's beginning to set. That's why it's so important to Christ to heal and to teach all that he can while he can. He knows it'll be dark soon. Verses 6 and 7. So he made spit from the ground, or made some mud after he spat on the ground, and he spread the mud on his eyes. You think about it, it don't take much. You think about the size of your eyes being about the size of quarters or so. It doesn't take much mud to cover them up. But a lot of people have asked why. And I heard this deal. It was about the healing qualities of saliva. And I don't know if y'all ever listened to Jeff Foxworthy, but he said something about a mother's spit being better than 409. And if that's the truth, Jesus's was pretty awesome. But that is not the case. And let me tell you, I believe, and I'll get to why here in just a minute. I believe that he didn't have water right there with him. But Christ don't give up. Christ used the spit because he plays chess and not checkers. And so let me read you something here. He was told to go to the pool of Siloam, which means sent, right? Let me read you this deal I found out of one of my commentaries. The pool of Siloam was located near the southeast corner of the city wall. Water flowed to it from the Gihon spring located in the Kidron Valley. Fearing a siege by the Assyrians, that's 2 Chronicles 32, Hezekiah had constructed a tunnel from the Gihon spring to the pool of Siloam, that's 2 Kings 20, to ensure a continual water supply. In case they were attacked, they couldn't cut off the water supplies because if they did, they would die. So the name probably originated because the water was sent to the pool via Hezekiah's tunnel from the Gihon spring. But its use in the Feast of Tabernacles suggests that the name also symbolized the blessings of God sent to Israel. Here it symbolizes God's ultimate blessing to the nation of Jesus, Jesus the Messiah, the one sent from God. How long do you think it took them to come up with that name, sent? Not very long. But God took that and he used it. Not only did he use it, he used it and compounded it, and then he hits us with it 2,000 years later. That to me, it just blows my mind. But anyway, back to the point of the story. Jesus may not have had water at hand, but he wanted the man to go to the one sent for his restoration. Right? You get where I'm going with that? The play on words. Being that the pool was called sent, he was, which one? That one, the one sent. You go to the one sent, and this Jesus sent by God for his restoration. So the same is said for each of us. We must go to the one sent for our salvation. Also, notice this just like the other one, just like the call to all the disciples. When Jesus called all the disciples, his first words were, "Come, follow me." Something along those lines. Get off your butt, make a move. We need action. He never told any of them, "Hang out here, I'll be back." But anyway, this starts with an act of obedience. Jesus did not need the water or the mud or the spit. He didn't need any of it. He healed the official son from like 20 miles away, if I remember right. And he didn't even say anything about it. He said, "Go, your son will live." And so he didn't conjure up any magical words or dances or anything. He just willed it to happen, and it happened. So the man needed to obey. Sorry, I just went over that. So afterwards, after all this had to be the talk of the town. And as you read through this, and I want you to on your own time, you can see the excitement build here. So first with the neighbors. So the man, remember this is the Sabbath day, right? So the man, he washes his eyes, and in washing the mud off his eyes, he washes away everything that was debilitating to his eyesight. And so first he goes home to the neighbors, and he's talked to these people for however long he's talked to these people, and he has never seen their face. So when he comes in and he sees his parents for the first time, you've got to imagine that scene. It would be heartbreaking. Well, what about Uncle Joey down the street, or Cousin Eddie across the street, or whatever the case may be? People, I'm sure, started coming around, and so he wanted to meet people, see them face to face. And as he did, they naturally questioned him about how this happened. And then he was brought to the Pharisees, and he told his story to the Pharisees, and they didn't believe him, so they summoned his parents in verse 22. And then the man was brought in again because they didn't believe his parents, and then he ruffled their feathers in 30, and so they cast him out of the synagogue in 34. And then they bring his parents. They brought his parents' fears to life from verse 22 right there in. I got ahead of myself. Give me just a second. In verse 34, they cast him out. So anyway, as I sped through that real quick, let me go back to what I was talking about earlier about the hold that these Jewish leaders had on these people. So, as I said, they questioned the man about what had happened to him, and they didn't believe him. So they took him to the Pharisees, and they didn't take him to the Pharisees to turn him in. They took him to the Pharisees because they were the ones that had all the answers for all the religious questions. They were the one that you had to go to if you wanted any information. A miracle had happened here, and they wanted to know exactly what had happened. So they took him so that they could find out, and that he could find out. So he was brought, and then they didn't believe him, so they summoned his parents. And in verse 20, this is how their parents reacted. They say, "We know this is our son, and that he has been born blind. But we don't know how he now sees. And we don't know who opened his eyes. Ask him. He is of age." That's 12 years old back then, just so you know. That's 12 years old. "He will speak for himself." 22 says, His parents said these things because they were afraid of the Jews, since the Jews had already agreed that if anyone confessed him as the Messiah, he would be banned from the synagogue. What does that mean, to be banned from the synagogue back then? That means you have no ability to praise and worship. You have no rights or abilities to sacrifice. They cut you off from God in that moment. You confess him as the Messiah, you're done. And that means you're going to hell, and nobody wants to go to hell. Or nobody does, I hope. But anyway, so they had power over these people, and it was not. It was evil. They were doing all these evil things. And there again, that goes back to the first story about how this false religion had a grip on people. The parents essentially turned this poor boy into these people because they didn't want to answer these questions for themselves. They were afraid. So they throw him to the wolves. In verse 30 to 34, I want to read this to you because this is excellent. And I believe this is the point. Verse 30 says, this is the second time they've brought him in. And I'll start in verse 28. They ridiculed him. You're that man's disciple, but we're Moses' disciple. We know that God has spoken to Moses, but we don't know where he's from, talking about Jesus. Verse 30, it's the young man. He says, this is an amazing thing. You don't know where he is from, and yet he opened my eyes. We know that God doesn't listen to sinners, but if anyone is God-fearing and does his will, he listens to him. Throughout history, no one has ever heard of someone opening the eyes of a person born blind. If this man were not from God, he would not be able to do anything. And they replied to him, you were born entirely of sin, and you're trying to teach us? Then they threw him out. That, to me, is the point. We have come from this man being a beggar one day, and again, on that Sabbath day, these Jewish leaders would not have seen him on the Sabbath day. So let's just say, for instance, that from the point that he was healed to the end of this story is less than 24 hours, because I truly believe it probably was. So he went from born blind and begging for however many years. It says 12, and they call him a man. So I'm guessing it was around the 20-year-old mark, whether it be from 18 to 25, take your pick, it doesn't say. But I'm thinking that's about where he is in age. But he has gone through his life, and everybody knows him because he's been in the same spot, just like the man in the last story. And then he comes around and he can see. And he can't fake that. He can't fake being a beggar that long. And then he can't fake being able to see. I mean, all they had to do was throw a stick in front of him, right? I mean, this was the 100%. But I'll get back to that. The questions, 35. Jesus heard that they had thrown the man out, and he went to find him and asked him, do you believe in the Son of Man? How would you like to be on a manhunt with Jesus Christ? I mean, he's going to be here. Let's go. You know, I mean, that was it. So anyway, right? I hear you, brother. So he says, the question had already been answered in verse 33, but Jesus was confronting a healed yet still broken man in the perfect way. And I'll explain what I mean by that. Verse 33, if this man were not from God, he wouldn't be able to do anything. So he knew right then and there that he was from God. Now, Jesus asked him, and he had nothing else that he could say, but he was a broken man. Because think about it. His neighbors did not believe him. Not only did his neighbors they believed he could see, they didn't know exactly how this all came about. So he was being questioned by his neighbors, all the family and friends that he ever had. And then he gets taken to the to the religious leaders, the one that holds the key to their salvation. And they didn't believe him. They didn't believe him. They brought in the parents. And they didn't believe the parents, so they brought him back in, and they argued with him. And then whenever they didn't like how well he acted when they argued with him, they kicked his butt out. Like his parents threw him to the wolves, and the only religious establishment in the entire town just kicked him to the curb. He was broke. He was down in the dumps. And Jesus walks up to him and confronted him in the perfect way. And the Son of Man is anybody's only hope, but in that it was his for sure only hope. And his situation was dire. And 37, or he asked, "Who is he, sir, that I may believe in him?" And Jesus answered, and this really blows my mind, because you think Jesus wasn't funny? Listen to this. Jesus says, "You have seen him." Okay? Hang on. So I'll stop. This guy hadn't been able to see but for 24 hours, give or take. The amount of people that he's seen, his neighbors, his family, and some friends that he's known for a long time, he's pretty sure, I would imagine, that he is not betting on any of them folks being him. And if they were, they'd probably have words, because it took him so long to get healed in the first place. And then the ones that he would probably have thought of first would have been the religious people that he had always known to be the key to salvation. They were the only ones that could perform any kind of miracles like this. Well, they just kicked him out. So it couldn't have been him. So he's probably sitting there like I would, and be looking at the ground, scratching his head, wondering, what are you talking about? The Rolodex of faces in the back of this man's mind is minute at best, very minimal. And Jesus said to him, "In fact, he is the one speaking with you." He said, "I believe, Lord." And he worshiped. He hit the ground right there like a sack of dirt, I bet, and he kissed his feet and he worshiped. And so, this man, oh, I'm sorry, I already went over that. Jesus said, and now, okay, so Jesus says in this moment, as I was thinking about this, and as I brought up that manhunt comment, you remember the Samaritan woman at the well? She was coming to the well in the middle of the day when nobody came to the well in the middle of the day. And Jesus just so happened to be there. Not only that, he sent the disciples away just at the right time, and then he was there, and then the woman came, and it was one of those divine, divine appointments, whatever. But anyway, this was another one of those. It had to be in my mind. You think they kick him to the curb. How long do you think Jesus wanted that man to feel the way he did after he was kicked out? Not too long. He probably got kicked out, probably didn't make it 30 feet or 50 yards, and Jesus came around that corner and said, "Hey, man, how's it going?" And so they started their talk. So the reason I say that is after he was kicked out, I'm sure the Pharisees or whomever was in that meeting were standing at the door. And when they were standing at the door and seeing this all take place between Jesus and this man, Jesus said in verse 39, "I came into this world for judgment, in order that those who do not see will see, and those who do see will become blind." The ones who don't see are aware and seek the Savior. I was there. I didn't know. I didn't know where I was going, but I was very positive that where I was going was not the place that I wanted to be in the future. And so I was blind to where I was and what I needed, and I found the Lord right here. But anyway, and the ones who claim to see are the ones that are truly blind. In this story, for sure, they're blind and they're doomed. And in verse 40, some of the Pharisees who were there with him heard these things, as I was saying, and asked him, "We aren't blind too, are we?" I mean, they have that knack for sticking their foot right in their mouth. You know what I mean? And it's happened more than once across Scripture. Jesus told them, "You wouldn't have sin, but now that you say we see, your sin remains." what he's saying there ties into verse 39. The ones who do not see and are humble enough to realize that and to seek the salvation and the Savior, those are the ones who are brought to see. And the ones who claim that they see, that are good enough, that are righteous enough, that do their own thing and they don't need anybody else, those are the ones that are truly blind, and they will only become more blind. So their sin remains. But back to the point. When this man was confronted with the truth, he chose to act in obedience. And when he was questioned about why, what changed in him, he told the truth. He tried to tell them about Christ, but they wouldn't listen. The more and more they badgered him, the bolder and louder he became, even though he knew it would get him shunned from his religion and society. We should all have that same strength of character as this blind beggar, and be willing to lose it all for the one who gave it all. And one that I really liked, one of my favorite books is Proverbs, and the one that I'm going to use here is Proverbs 29, verse 25. It says, "The fear of mankind is a snare, but the one who trusts in the Lord is protected." And this is a story of that. A story of that. It could have been two stories of that if the crippled man would have acted right, but he didn't. But that's all I've got for us tonight. Whenever we meet up again next week, I'm going to go over the story of Lazarus, and we're going to do one more. And I'm really thinking pretty hard about doing one on the Transfiguration, and because I think that is a great story. I love that story, and so. But before we go, does anybody have any questions, any comments, anything?